I was born in Delaware, Ohio. Me and my parents lived there up until I was around 5 or 6. I recall during that time period of living there, everything seemed good. Um, this is something I probably would have taken to my grave had I not been asked if I had ever been sexually abused during a mental evaluation. I remember it happening when I was 6 years old. There were two male relatives. I don't even think the one knew about the other, but who knows? But it happened periodically. I remember one time my uncle telling me if I ever told my parents, then they would be angry at me. And I guess I believed him as a kid because, I never told anyone. I remember as I got older, I felt like if I did say something, I'd be more of a burden, causing disruption amongst the family. Eventually, my dad ended up, I guess, finding more work opportunities. So we ended up moving to Eastern Kentucky. My parents, they divorced when I was 9 years old. After my parents divorced, me and my mom moved away, and I didn't have to be around them so much anymore. But my abusers being part of my family had a big impact on my childhood. I failed the first grade. I had horrible nightmares where I'd wake up screaming. I can remember feeling as though, like, someone was laying in bed with me, and my mom would pull back the cover, and it would just be my baby doll. It's embarrassing to say, but, there were times I went to bed until I was 10 or 11. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but, I recall when I started developing, I started wearing baggy T-shirts. I just didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, and not 100% starting what resonates when it comes to sexual abuse. But looking back, I believe it affected me in those ways. I remember in my freshman year, I started skipping classes, skipping school. I ran away from home. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, really, because of my behavior and, the fact that I wouldn't open up and talk about how I was feeling inside, being expressive about some of the things I was going through. It really caused problems between me and my mom, and I ended up moving in with my dad. I started a new school. I didn't really know anyone. It was a little hard to adjust. Some of the students there weren't very nice to me, and there was a couple occasions where I was bullied. I talked my dad into letting me resign from school as long as I promised to get a job and study for my GED. And I think I was still 15 years old, about to turn 16, when he went to school with me and signed me out permanently.
I was really looking at what she was like at the time of the incident and at the time of her guilty plea. And she had some risk factors that made her cope with stress by withdrawing and shutting down. And I thought that was present at the time that the incident occurred, and also at the time of her guilty plea. She was under a lot of stress for both of them, and in both cases.
I was on Xanax. My public defender at the time came to me with this, the plea bargain that, if I pled guilty to murder, then the state wouldn't seek the death penalty on my four co-defendants that were of age. But, if all six of us had a sign or the deal was off the table, they gave me 3 days to decide. They took me off the Xanax because, quote, so I can have a clear head. It's something that I didn't want to do, and, because I wasn't guilty of murder, my family was pleading for me not to sign, and, on the third day, David Leonard came. Well, between those 3 days, he was visiting me, looking back, I feel like he was, of course, applying pressure because maybe he didn't want to go to trial either. I don't know, but, he would tell me things, you may have a better chance if you pled than going to trial. Going in front of a judge might have more leniency, but I was still indecisive. The plea didn't benefit me, but at the same time, I didn't want my four co-defendants to be put to death either. So I signed. It's, something that has forever weighed on me, and it's, you know, a piece of paper basically saying that you're guilty of murder, and, you know, you're not. So it was hard, and at the time I didn't fully register. I was basically signing my life away.
She was impaired in several ways. One was that she was very depressed and anxious. Dr. Miller gave a deposition and said that at the time she entered her plea that she was having suicidal thoughts and depression that were enough that she could have been committed to a psychiatric hospital. So she had to be a danger to herself or others. So that was one factor. And second, she was taking a medicine, Xanax, which is to treat anxiety, but it has a lot of mental side effects. It is sedating. It kind of lowers people's alertness. And so that would have been another fact that would have impaired her functioning.
The plea bargain didn't benefit me at all, and I knew if I signed it, then they wasn't going to seek the death penalty on the 4 adults. But as far as truly registering that I was signing my life away, I thought, you know, in my mind that I can still maintain my innocence to murder and save my 4 co-defendants at the same time. So it didn't really register that by signing this piece of paper, I'm saying that I'm guilty. I know it doesn't make maybe much sense, but at the time, you know, because I knew that they knew I wasn't the trigger person. I didn't have any gun residue on my clothes. So David Leonard told me that if I didn't sign, they were going to put my 4 co-defendants to death. And I believed him because I would see the articles in the newspaper of hanging nooses, and I feel like it was up to me because it was the 3rd day and everybody, you know, he told me everybody already signed. So what are you going to do?
Actually, she was evaluated by another psychologist at the time of her trial, Dr. Miller, and actually her IQ was a lower than because she was so stressed. But when I saw her, it was 86. That would put her at about the 18th percentile. When I saw her, I did some testing, you know, with her on her mental abilities, and she had some trouble like learning information. Her intelligence was what's called low average, 18th percentile, you know, 50th percentile. That's the middle of the average range. So she was out of 100 people, you know, 82 would be smarter than she was, and 18 would be less smart. So she has low average intelligence. And so her lower intelligence and reasoning, you know, that was present always, but her mental difficulties would make it harder for her than for an average person to reason about her situation and to remember what her lawyer told her and to understand legal documents. And then, you know, finally, she was immature and eager to please, and her personality style makes it likely for her to deal with emotional issues by just putting them down, by avoiding or repressing them. She has some post-traumatic stress symptoms. You know, she had a history of being sexually abused and also witnessing verbal abuse in her life. So all of those factors would have affected her at the time of her plea bargain.
At that time, I was able to interview every applicant for the prison dog program. And we selected Karen to be one of those because of her desire to help animals.
Karen was part of the team the entire time I was there. So she definitely stood out to me because there was some that we lost, some that quit, but Karen was always stable, and she was always the one who we really could count on with the dogs.
Because of her character and because she was a wonderful person and her ethics, we usually gave her the hard cases. We gave her the dogs that we were real concerned about, that might have aggression issues, because we felt that she could really help the dogs better than any other team.
In my opinion, yeah, she was stable. Even her demeanor, she was just always on point. She was there was no fluctuation in her attitude or personality. She was who she was, and it was a stable, very ethical, respectful young lady.
I'll tell you, the times that we spent with her, really, it was hard for me to even wonder why they were in the prison. And when I would leave, she had a real calming effect about her. And when I would leave, I would feel like a better person too. It was kind of strange,
Yeah,
because of her calming effect.
She really had a good aura about her. I mean, again, we didn't ask why they were there, but you could just tell the sincere people. And I never had a problem with her ever. She was always, there was never a question in my mind, is there going to be a problem, or what am I going to get from her today? Because it was always Karen. And to me, she was a very good dog trainer, a good person to us.
And very prepared.
Mhm.
When we would come, she would have the questions that she needed to ask. She and several of the other girls did it upon themselves to take the animal care technician training online. And she paid for that through her own financial source. We don't know where that came from, but she took that training, which really made us feel like, okay, you're in this program to succeed. When I was working for Collierville, I told them, if any of you all get out while I'm still director of the shelter, I want you to come work for me. I mean, I wanted them to work for me because I knew they would be hard workers. I knew Karen would do whatever she needed to do for the dog to succeed. And like I said, we gave her the hard cases.
Mm-hmm. I could see her being a good member of society when I worked with her back in 2012. So I can only imagine what she's willing and capable of now. And like Nina said, I would welcome her to work with me. I can't say that I told everybody come work with me, but I would definitely have her work with me.
I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years in the Mid-South, and she's a wonderful young woman, and her character, I would hire her yesterday.
We're proud of her. She needs to know that.
Yes.
She when Nina approached me and she was like, "It's Karen," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's Karen." It was just the one that we liked her so much. I mean, there were quite a few, but Karen stood out. I mean, I could be at home doing nothing right now, but I'm here for Karen.
There have been a few legal issues that we have kind of engaged with over the course of the past 6.5 years. The main one, and the one that we are dealing with right now, concerns the constitutionality of Karen's life without parole sentence. And the reason why that's a significant legal issue is that in a 2012 case called Miller versus Alabama, the Supreme Court said, I'm kind of oversimplifying, but basically the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional to sentence people who were juveniles at the time of an offense. It's unconstitutional to sentence them to life in prison without the possibility of parole, unless the sentencing court decides that they are one of the very few juvenile offenders who basically don't have any possibility for rehabilitation, or who are irrevocably corrupt, or something of that nature. And so we have been arguing in kind of various courts and various ways for the past few years that Karen's life without parole sentence was unconstitutional because nobody made a finding at her sentencing hearing that she could never be rehabilitated. And in fact, if anything, that the sentencing hearing suggests that the sentencing judge thought the opposite, that she did have a prospect for rehabilitation. And then the kind of more specific legal issue that we're raising right now with the Tennessee Supreme Court has to do with a Tennessee Supreme Court decision called Booker, which held essentially that when sentencing a juvenile offender, the sentencing court has to have the option to impose a sentence of something less than life. Like it's not allowed for them to just be allowed to pick life and nothing lower than that. And so we're arguing that Karen's sentence was unconstitutional under sort of that framework as well, because in her case, the sentencing judge only had two options: life with parole and life without parole. So there was no option to give her something less, 30 years or 40 years or something like that. So we're arguing that her sentence was unconstitutional for that additional reason.
I don't offer excuses, and I'm responsible for my own actions. I just hope and pray that society, the community, the surviving victim, and every single person that has ever been affected by this case will find in their hearts to forgive me for my actions and the things that I didn't do that I should have done. I helped cause a lot of people pain, and that is something I will forever have to live with every single day. It's been a long 27 years, and, I can't undo my past, but I hope that people are able to see my growth and maturity and recognize my humanity, and that I'm not a monster and a horrible person others sensationalized and projected me out to be.
Karen was sentenced under a legal framework that is now recognized as being contrary to the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, the law right now is you cannot sentence a juvenile to life without parole unless you find that the juvenile is one of those very rare people who just doesn't have any possibility for rehabilitation at all. And in fact, sort of in practical terms, almost all states have moved away from sentencing juveniles to life without parole, period, under any circumstances. And the fact that Karen is, as of right now, in prison forever with no possibility of release, just based on the fortuity that she was sentenced under this regime that everyone agrees now was unfair and unconstitutional. I think that is tremendously unjust. Whether someone spends the rest of their life in prison or not should not depend on kind of by chance when they happen to get sentenced or in what state they happen to get sentenced or something of that nature. We need to treat all juvenile offenders equally, and that's something that has not happened to Karen. And so that's the injustice that we're doing our best to try to rectify.
I feel that Karen deserves a second chance. She was a child when she went to prison. She has grown up. Do I think that she would ever cause problem to anybody? Absolutely not. Karen was not, that was just not her mentality. She was not a troublemaker. She was not a fighter. She didn't try to cause trouble with anybody. I think that it would be an honor for Karen to walk out of there. A lot of people are praying for her release. And, with that being said, she would succeed and prosper being out of prison. I know that she was a child and a lot of things have changed since she went in there. But, with her support group, her family, myself, Karen she will do wonderful.
I think witnessing what happened to the victims in a paralyzed-like state, laced in fear and regret, was the catalyst that caused me to take on the mindset of, never again. After beating myself up for so many years over the things that I, should have done and the things that I didn't do, I realized, I was just throwing myself a pity party, so to speak, and, always thinking about the past and what I should have done different instead of what I can do different in the present. I dived into therapy for emotional trauma and sought out counseling for about 15 years or so. The first 10 years of my incarceration, the warden would come and get me along with a couple other women who were convicted as juveniles. We go to the chapel and, speak to a group of young girls at risk. We talk about peer pressure, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and how it only takes one moment to change your life, or being with somebody that does something that will forever change your life. And overcoming all those painful experiences and poor choices that I made, I was able to offer myself as an example to these young girls, and in a way that was also healing, because I was able to mentor. It was, like an ounce of good came out of such dark experiences. And, if I ever get out of here and if I have the resources, mentoring to young kids at risk is something that I would like to continue to do. I feel like honoring the victims, I owe that. It's giving back in ways that will perpetuate life and add value to life.